Hey, this is Jillian. I'm here with Sita Soul, and today we're making a gluten-free bread. I'm excited about this bread. It's super easy, super fun, super fast. It's gluten-free, and it's vegan. Everything you could possibly want and need in a bread. The first thing you want to do, there's wet ingredients and there's dry ingredients, right? So we're going to start by preparing the wet ingredients first and get that going because they need to gel. And then we're going to do the dry ingredients and then add them in together. Because this bread doesn't have gluten, we need something that's going to bind it together. So what we're using instead is something called psyllium husk. And psyllium husk is a fiber, and when it gets wet, it becomes gelatinous and gooey and will give the bread kind of a spongy gooiness. That is what we really want. So the first thing that's going to go in there is I'm going to pour the water in. And it takes a little while for the psyllium husk to rehydrate, which is why we start with this. It takes about, I would say, give it 15-20 minutes to come into its full jelly-like state. Here we go. I'm going to just, you could whisk it, but today we're using a fork. It's just as good. Mostly you want to make sure there's no lumps in there and that every last little fiber is wet. And then we're also going to add into this liquid mixture right now a little bit of maple syrup and a little bit of cider vinegar. See, starting to get thick. It will continue to thicken. So while this is thickening, I'm going to put together the dry ingredients. So I have this KitchenAid mixer here, and that's what we're going to use. You could also mix the dough with your hand for a while, old school like your grandma did, and you put lots of love into it. I like to do that too. So what we have here is white rice flour. It's about 3/4 of a cup. The second flour I'm adding is the same amount, 100 grams or 3/4 of a cup of chickpea flour. And then the third flour we're going to put in is this oat flour. Right now it's not a flour, it's actually oats. You put your oats into a high-speed blender and you just make a flour out of it. Easy peasy. And there you have it. And it's a nice fine grind. I want the same consistency as my other flours. So I did go fine with that. And then I'm going to pour it right into my bowl. So this is called tapioca flour. It's also called tapioca starch. It's the same thing. You can get this in local health food store or order it. And then a teaspoon of salt. I like to use a really high quality non-refined salt like a sea salt. 1 teaspoon. Now what's going to make this rise? We are using a teaspoon of baking powder. So that's what this is, already measured. And we are using also a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. This bread has no yeast, so you don't have to wait for it to rise. You just put in those items, and that's why I love this bread recipe. You can make this bread quicker than you can run to the bakery and get the one that you don't want that has the gluten in it. This one is even quicker, even easier, and it's going to make your whole house smell so good. That's all my dry ingredients in there, okay? First thing you should do before you even start your bread is preheat the oven. We preheated the oven to 350 degrees. Be careful with your oven, calibrate accordingly. I know my oven at home is a little bit off. It's about 25 degrees off, so I actually have to make my oven warmer. So you should know, you should have a thermometer in your oven if you don't, that tells you the exact temperature because it's really precise. The directions, especially for baking something like bread or muffins, are calibrated at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. So check in with your particular oven. Okay, so we waited a little bit, about 15-20 minutes, and now see how thick it is? Nice. This is what we're looking for. I'm going to pour this in. So there's our wet ingredients. So I'm going to just give this a quick stir around with my spatula because this machine sometimes leaves a little bit of dry stuff on the bottom if I don't get it all incorporated first. And I'm also putting the love in. Remember we talked about putting the love in. This is it. So, and see, it's starting to get kind of dough-like already. Probably I'm going to leave this going for about a minute or 2 or 3 until it sticks together more like a ball. Okay, so I'm going to shut this off. It's been going for about 3 minutes. So you see that? Now, see how it's starting to be sticky? I mean, it is sticky now. Way different than when we first started. And it's starting to stick together. You see that? It's coming together. It takes a little bit of elbow grease, but this is the most work of this whole bread, right? We haven't done anything but measured and pour things into a bowl so far. So there's different ways you can make this bread. You can make it in a loaf pan. Parchment is better than spraying it with nonstick spray because even with that, it might stick. But this is so easy because you could just lift it out of the loaf pan. So I'm all about making life easy and less cleanup. So that's for one. But what we're gonna do with this is make more of a traditional round loaf. So what I'm going to do is grab a little bit of flour right now. I have a little bit more white rice flour here and just put it out on my sheet and take this and just pour it right onto there. And I'm gonna form it into the shape of a loaf. This is a rustic loaf. And we're looking for that because you're making it at home and you want it to look homemade, don't you? If it was going to be the perfect round loaf, people might think you bought it in the store and they might not realize that you did this and they might not be as impressed. So to impress people as much as possible, let's leave it slightly rustic looking. And then the final touch on this is a little bit of sesame seeds. Because I like sesame seeds on my bread. You know, I was a big bread eater back when I used to eat lots of bread. I always loved the seeded bread, and I always used to buy the long Italian breads and bite the end off before we got home. People knew when I went bread shopping because there was never a butt on the bread. You could make this into a long loaf like that too. I think that would be lovely. But today we're gonna do it this way because I like the idea of cutting it for sandwiches. And that's pretty much it. It's ready to go. I'm going to take it and slip it nicely onto my baking tray, and it's going right in the oven just like this. And I'm sliding it in, and I'm going to set the timer for 55 minutes. Okay, so our bread is out of the oven. We let it cool on this cooling rack, which is really good to let the air flow around it so that it gets totally cool. And you want to let it cool 100% before you cut into it. You can make some really nice bruschetta, you can make some sandwiches, you can put a nice spread on it, maybe some vegan cheese spread or some avocados, make some avocado toast. So many possibilities, so good, gluten-free, so easy, so fast. Enjoy.